This part here around this pipe is still a little bit ugly. The fillets are nicely rounded. There's a couple little places where I have dropouts and stuff because the glass bead putty was a little bit drier than it probably should have been. I'd like the whole thing to look like this as opposed to like that. But, you know, it's perfectly fine for wrapping epoxy around. Now, what I am going to do is mix up some really thin glass bead epoxy, not even a putty, more of a paint, and I'm going to use it to fill in areas around here and just paint over these seams. I'm going to try to pool, kind of a pool of liquid there to make this corner have more water flowing away from it, as well as this corner here. You can see underneath here I have a little bit of the leftover stuff I did my first one that had some little fiberglass, and I'm going to pool in there to try to make this a nice, you know, smooth corner going in there. Also, I'm going to be doing this entire top edge. I'm going to be putting masking tape on either side of this to prevent it from dripping. That will mean the epoxy will stick to the masking tape, and I'm going to have to sand that tape off, essentially. But I think that's better than trying to sand a whole bunch of drips that come down both sides. Here is the masking tape walls that I've put along the top here. And the goal is to contain the stuff kind of on this rough join here and going over that. If some gets in these little holes here, that's great too. I don't really want it going over the edge and trying to cover up this round over, so I'm mostly going to be painting in a line. I'm not trying to hit the edge of these, it's just if I drip over, and I'm sure I will at some point, it'll keep it from dripping all the way down. Now the guy on the bottom here, I'm planning on removing almost as soon as I paint the stuff, so I'm going to be counting on gravity to kind of pull this stuff down, and if I put anything up there, it's going to go down and it's going to run out this way, so I'm trying to have a nice edge there to say, hey, this is exactly where it's stopping. And so after I put it down and it stopped flowing, I'm going to be ripping that up to lift off anything that happens to be on top of the tape. I'm going to be mixing up some epoxy and glass balloons for a almost paint to fill in cracks and gaps and smooth things out. This is 30 grams of glass balloons. If I mix up 150 grams of epoxy resin, that's 180 total, and 30 is about 15–16% of 180. So I'm going to try that initially. I'm going for a super thick paint, or kind of a runny honey consistency, for smoothing things out a lot. And I can always mix up more resin if I need to, although I would prefer to get it right the first time. Since we're doing 150 grams of resin, that makes it nice and easy because I do 100 of resin and 50 of hardener to get my 150. It doesn't have to be perfect, just pretty close to a 2-to-1 ratio. Alright, I poured way too much resin because that's 130. So I have to put an extra 15 grams of hardener in. So instead of 50, I need to do 65. So that's 195. So I'm going to have extra resin here. In case it's too thick, I can pour extra in. Plus, if anything stays in my, there we go. If anything stays in my mixing cup, it's not going to affect things too much. I'll have plenty extra to stay in the mixing cup. Alright, minimum of 1 minute, up to 3 minutes of mixing. Alright, let's put in 150 grams. Mix it up a little, see what happens. Gotta be careful turning it upside down, you gotta hope that Ziploc holds. Alright, so you can see it's kind of pancake batter consistency, maybe cake batter consistency. I want it runnier than that a little bit. I'm going to put in some more. Looks like 10% is what I want, not 16%, so it's probably good. I went up to 190 grams of resin mix. And I've left an air bubble in the top of the bag here. You can also burp the bag and get the air bubble out for mixing. I think that's a little better for the putties. For the liquids, I think having the air bubble is kind of helpful. And now that the glass beads are no longer dusty, I really don't need the respirator on at that point. And that's just really for pouring the glass beads in, and when you first dump the resin in case the bag pops or something, you get a big mouthful of glass bead dust. But now that they're all stuck in epoxy, you're not breathing that stuff in. It might get stuck to your skin, but it's not flying around in the air anymore. It looks like I've compromised the seal on one of my Ziplocs. It's between the two zips. It's one of the reasons I use freezer bags for this. They have double zippers. If you get the air out, you're less likely to pop a zipper with the air by squeezing it. Alright, so it's running off the paintbrush, but it's not super liquidy because I do need it to kind of smooth out some vertical surfaces. So I think it's ready to use. You can see it does run a bit going down, hence the blue painter's tape are in the bottom of vertical surfaces, but not necessarily the top. But I want it to be runny to smooth things out. I'm hoping to not have too many bubbles or wrinkles. And if you had a slow hardener would be nice here, because I'm working against the kicking time of my resin, because when that thing kicks, this thing's going to turn into a paste regardless of how much resin I have in it versus micro balloons. I'm saving the top for last. Partially because I think a thicker resin will be fine up top, and partially because it's a separate piece, and if this thing kicks and I can't use it, I can always mix up another batch and do the top later. But it's already sticking to my paintbrush and not running off as much as it used to. So I'm trying to get this applied well. And it's not running down the surface as much as it used to, too. I might have to come back with a paper towel and get some places if it doesn't run down. Alright, got a little messy there, so I'm degloving and putting another one on. If I'd been thinking, I would have double gloved on so I could pull one off and just be ready to go, but I didn't think it'd get that messy. If you do both gloves, you don't have to worry about getting junk from your other glove on your first glove. My other glove wasn't too bad. It's kind of running out and getting hard to get out of the bag, so I'm going to cut a corner off the bag with my fiberglass scissors and then use this thing like a pastry bag. Alright, I've pretty much covered the whole top. Now it's time to remove some of this masking tape. You can see where that tape was if the paint epoxy balloon mixture was thick, there is a line there, but that's on a flat area where I can sand it down with the sander, so I'm not too worried about those lines. I might come back after 10 or 15 minutes when it's had a chance to set up a little bit and kind of hit these edges with a paper towel just to smooth things out a little bit. But I'm also letting gravity have some time here. This is a medium set resin, but still it's pretty liquidy, and I actually like that liquid flow because it makes a relatively smooth surface. And even on the top here, you can see it's flowing down a bit, even after it was starting to kick and set up. It still has a lot of flow left in it, and so I'm going to let that flow a little bit and set up. And I'm not too worried about being up high because there's no milled fiberglass in this. It's just the glass balloons, and that stuff sands down pretty easily. So I can sand it. It'll keep the smoothness, but it'll go down a bit, and I'll knock down the edges, and it'll look real smooth throughout. So I'm basically taking advantage of the high sandability of the glass balloon epoxy. I am done with all the cleanup and wiping that I'm going to do, and I'm leaving this thing to dry. You can kind of see, it smooths out due to flow and gravity. I have little drips here and there, and places where I have removed the masking tape had a large amount of kind of a dam of this stuff, and it's flowed out a little bit more. I can hit that with a flat sander and merge it into what's the flat surface next to it, so that's not really a big issue. I have some big puddles in the corners here to try to get water to always flow down and out. There's a little bit of kind of wrinkles or places where drips are going, but that's relatively easy to smooth out with sandpaper on a smooth surface. The top here has a lot of excess coverage, and there's a few places like right there where it didn't completely fill the gap, but I'm not going to deal with anything like that right now. But pretty much everywhere else you can see this is completely covering that gap between the foam and the wood, and I'll just be sanding this thing over the top, and because it sands off so easily, I believe it's going to make a pretty smooth transition between those two. Half hour of sanding, and I have a relatively smooth surface up here. There's some little dots, places like this, where if I really cared I'd have to put in more filler and then sand some more, but I'm just going to count on the epoxy resin kind of dripping into that and the cloth going over the top of it. I have some nicks in the foam here, some more bigger divots right here, but all in all this transition is very smooth, and you can see kind of the wood to foam and the fiberglass in between line there, but from a smoothness standpoint it's perfectly smooth. So when I put a piece of fiberglass cloth over that, and then after that I put epoxy over it to get it smooth, and then after that I paint it, you're basically not going to have a visible transition between these two pieces, because it's really the color that you can see now, and once I paint it you won't be able to see that color. Inside here, I could hand sand this to be a little bit smoother, but it's not bad. There's a little divot right there. And so I have my fillets here. Water will run down and out this way, all the way along there. Same thing over here. This big drip that was right there is mostly gone. I still have a little bit of waviness there, but I suspect that when I put my cloth, my fiberglass cloth up here, I'm going to have a cut here and there, and it's going to conform to that waviness. So we're going to have some waviness in the final product there, but I mean, I have gaps underneath here where the foam isn't the same size as the plywood, or the cedar board, so it's not going to be a perfect bench, but it's good enough for me to move on to the next step.